Who is Ryomen Sukuna? Let's talk about it. The backstory reveal for Sukuna's character is rapidly approaching, so I'm going to go over everything we know about him and why he might not be as one-dimensional as many people think. So what drives Sukuna, and why does he have 4 arms, 4 eyes, and an extra mouth? Because contrary to popular belief, Sukuna is not actually a cursed spirit, but he's also not exactly human either. And as far as we know, nobody in Jujutsu Kaisen is born looking like this, and when Tengen is seen by Kenjaku for the first time in probably 1,000 years, Kenjaku thinks she looks just like him. And something interesting to note is that Tengen also says that they are keeping their appearance with a barrier technique. I know a lot has happened since this chapter came out, but we have to remember that in the grand scheme of Jujutsu Kaisen, this is only like 30 chapters ago. So this is some of the most relevant information about Sukuna currently, especially considering Tengen is stated to be closer to a cursed spirit than a human. And I want to note that this also plays into Sukuna's conversation with Jogo, where he is shocked that Jogo wants to be quote-unquote human. Because for Sukuna, it is very likely that he wanted the exact opposite. He wanted to be as far away from humanity as possible. And that's all well and good, but how does that translate to Sukuna's power today? Well, Kenjaku, Tengen, and Sukuna, they all knew each other. That much is confirmed to us, especially after Sukuna eats his own head. And Kenjaku is well known for experimenting on people, and even Sukuna takes note of this, saying, "Kenjaku, you always do the grossest things," when he is confronted by Yuji in chapter 214. And in the original inspirations for Jujutsu Kaisen, Kenjaku's character is likely based on one of the urban legends around Gege Akatame's hometown. And I'll leave a link in the description to a Reddit post for people who want to read about this more, but the gist of this urban legend is that there was a man who was experimenting on conjoined twins, using things such as Kadoku rituals, and Kadoku rituals, once again, are name dropped in Jujutsu Kaisen in chapter 216. And my personal feelings here, especially if you've watched my channel for a while, you know that I think Yuji and Sukuna are probably twins or related on a deeper level in some other way. And whether or not that's true, I do think that Sukuna being an experiment of Kenjaku from the Heian era makes a lot of sense. There is something unnatural about Sukuna's power beyond just him being this giant deformed creature. But I will touch on that because there is something inherently unnerving about having a giant 8-foot tall creature thing walking towards you while it's chanting from its stomach but not actually saying anything to you. I think that Gege did a pretty good job at portraying to the reader that somebody like Sukuna, something this evil, shouldn't exist. We had similar things with Angel's words saying that characters coming back as reincarnated sorcerers is against God's will, but actually seeing the true form Sukuna on screen, it hits differently. At least for me it did, because whenever we're talking about Sukuna, Tengen, Kenjaku, things always get a little dicey. Because Sukuna knowing Tengen being the one that built up the foundation of Jujutsu, it kind of begs the question of what cursed energy really is in Japan. And I'm going to go into a pretty out there theory that Kenjaku and Tengen are the parents of Sukuna and Yuji. Twins are a bad omen, but more importantly, I just think it would be super funny to have the most messed up family tree possible. And Kenjaku has already referred to Yuji in the past as that thing, so he's not exactly somebody to love his kids. But Sukuna's attire of robes inside of his innate domain and him being called the Fallen, it sounds like he was probably a Buddhist priest alongside Tengen and Kenjaku, presumably. Especially when he finds his own mummified corpse as a Shinbutsu mummy, and Shinbutsu mummies are basically Buddhist priests that starve themselves to death. Sukuna finds this, he thinks it's ironic, and there are a few reasons he could think it's ironic. Number one would be, well, he's not exactly on the path to enlightenment anymore, he's the most hedonistic person on earth. But on a little bit of a simpler note, he is also a cannibal, and his favorite hobby is eating, so of course a Shinbutsu mummy that starves themselves would be a little bit of an ironic thing. But the thing I'm really intrigued by is what made Sukuna this deformed, because it kind of looks like Yuji in chapter 238 is also starting to become this way. That might be a little bit of a leap, but then again, Yuji is literally leaping at him with Sukuna hands. And like I mentioned in my previous video, Yuji is this perfect vessel that can eat any cursed object and gain power from it. And like Gojo said at the start of the series, somebody with a unique ability like this only comes once every 1,000 years or so. So it sounds like a pretty incredible talent, and a talent that has only happened once or so prior. And while we have characters like Megumi that can suppress Sukuna, it is not the same as Yuji, who can simply nom whatever he wants that has a cursed object label. We even have Yuji hiding his mouth, and for some reason I just feel like it's going to be a Baraka face when he comes back next chapter. Higuruma's domain is probably going to give us a pretty good insight into some of Sukuna's backstory, assuming there is actually a court trial. But what we know right now for Sukuna in the Heian period is he is pretty much the Jujutsu stand-in for the god Susanoo. And this isn't even really a hard comparison to make. I've heard from a few Japanese viewers that this is so obvious if you're familiar with Japanese mythology that they're confused more people don't mention it. Susanoo is the storm god, as many of you are probably familiar if you watch Naruto, but he is also the god that fought Yamato no Orochi, the same 8-headed serpent that Sukuna fought in JJK. And he was also known as a harvest deity for harvest festivals, just like we saw with Sukuna in the Heian period. And in more recent times, he is also known as the god of love and marriage, so Sukuna really going out of his way to hit all these checkboxes. But things in JJK, obviously they're almost never one-to-one, so he's not really going to come out and be like, I am the god Susanoo, worship me. He will definitely tell you to worship him, but not under that moniker. He will tell you under the moniker Ryomen Sukuna, which is a title, not his true name. And I want to talk about Sukuna's character here for a second, because a lot of people are under the impression that Sukuna simply loves combat, which he does, but there is more to it. When we take a look at Sukuna's dialogue, there is a certain bitterness to it. There is something behind Sukuna's mask, his literal mask. He's got a chip on his shoulder. He prioritizes strength, but it feels like this is something that he was driven to. His hatred of weakness and people being unable to defend themselves sounds self-motivated. There is a subtle disconnect between some of the things Sukuna says to others and the things he actually thinks to himself in the brief moments of internal dialogue we get. For example, he thinks about being taught love before he fights Gojo, and then later to Kashimo he says, "Oh, I have never once thought about being satisfied by another," when clearly a semblance of this thought did cross his mind when he ran into Gojo and he wondered, is this going to be the guy? It wasn't, but it was pretty close. And I think one of the most important lines is to Yuji when he says, "You should spend your lives stifling misery," because that's what he does. Sukuna at his core sounds like a miserable person, and his words to Kashimo at the end of Kashimo's life also reinforce this to me when he says, "Be sure love is worthless. I have never looked to be satisfied by somebody else. The taste of humans is as diverse as it is fleeting. The perfect thing to slurp up until I die. Sukuna, are you okay?" This does not sound like somebody living their best life. It sounds like somebody trying to run away from a problem. And while I do not think there will ever be a Sukuna redemption, there will be a reveal of why he is the Fallen, and this is why love is being brought up in his character arc so much. Yes, the Sukuna character arc. Fuck you, Sukuna. You cut Gojo in half. I'm not forgetting about that. Those are my thoughts about Sukuna for this video. I think I covered most of the things I want to talk about. It is kind of hard to give an educated guess as to how he became this four-armed form, mainly because we don't have a lot of explanation for it outside of Tengen, and if he is close to a cursed spirit like Tengen is, that probably comes into play later. But I also want to hear what you guys think. What do you think of Sukuna's true form? Do you think we're gonna get a reveal for it pretty soon, and how he got this form to begin with? And what do you think the true origin of Sukuna is? Let me know in the comments below. I know I said I was going to try to do a chapter 238 review, but I never got around to it just because I was feeling crummy this weekend. But I'll most certainly be talking about the next chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen and talking about Yuta Okkotsu and Kenjaku coming up pretty soon, so look forward to that. And if you like content like this, subscribe for more. And as always, thanks for watching.